G'day folks, welcome to the Art of Teaching podcast. Here we talk about how to become more compelling communicators in the way of Jesus. My name is John Tyson, a pastor here in New York City, and I'm joined by John Mark Comer, founder of Practicing the Way, and Jefferson Bethke, author of Take Back Your Family and To Hell with the Hustle. Welcome to Season 2.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm excited for today's episode, not just because we're turning a hopeful corner. I mean, you've been listening, what are we at, 4 or 5 weeks in? And it actually has been incredible. It's been surgical. It's been enlightening to me. Hopefully those listening and watching. But we are turning a corner, and a corner that I'm excited to turn. And that is, what do we do about it now? What can we do about it now? What is the hope? What is the gospel message to a world of secularism? And so I think, John Mark, you go ahead and start of just like when you start thinking about this, as we've been talking about it, what do we do first? How do we start framing it? How do we start thinking about preaching or teaching or just living in a hopeful way towards kind of re-enchanting, where we just talked about being disenchanted?
Yeah, I think we covered 3 steps down into a disenchanted world: suppression, emptying, and now, what was the third
Contested
one?
space.
Contested space.
Yes.
Now we want to walk back up 3 steps to a re-enchanted world, you know? So step 1 would be, I think, to awaken desire. You know, in the ancient Christian paradigm, the first stage theory that Christians ever developed was called the 3 ways, and it goes back very early in the tradition of the church. And there's like a pre-stage. The first stage is, basic life of discipleship. The pre-stage was what they called awakening. This is what ancient Christians call, what evangelicals would call getting saved.
Yes.
But awakening, it's such better language,
Yeah.
And it was in part just awakening to the reality of God, the reality of Jesus, the death, burial, resurrection, the reality of the Spirit. But it was an awakening to desire. So 4th century, St. Augustine does brilliant work, that has really defined a philosophical stream that basically says human beings are primarily desire-based creatures. Now that's contested. I think that you could say that we're primarily relationally based creatures, but those are kind of 2 different ways of saying the same thing, because we desire ultimately love, to love and be loved, to be known, to be happy, to be joyful in relational community. So the problem, in Augustine's framework is not that we don't desire or that we don't love, it's that our loves are disordered, that we love the wrong things or we love the right things in the wrong order. So, James K. Smith has done beautiful kind of reintroduction of Augustine's thought to the modern church. So I think one of the first things that our preaching has to do is get people in touch with their latent desires, the desires below the hedonistic desires. And sex is a great example. Christopher West is writing beautifully about human sexuality and how your body, all it wants is an orgasm. Yeah. But what you want, what your soul wants, is something so much deeper. It's communion, it's contribution. You want to be one with another. You want to love and be loved. You want to give and receive love. You want to touch the mystery at the heart of the Trinity. You want to add to the world and fill the world up with more life. Like, that's actually what you want. Yeah. And swiping right on Tinder and sleeping around is not going to ever touch on that ache. So the problem is not that people desire sexual immorality, it's that they don't desire strongly enough. Yeah. So that's where I think a lot of our preaching goes wrong. And this is, I think I could aim this criticism back at myself because of my personality and wiring. It's often aimed at curbing desire or rebuking desire rather than helping people get in touch with their deeper desire. That's good. And so, there is a place for those that are more mature in the spiritual journey where we can more easily sort through our conflicted and contradictory desires and name the ones that need to be crucified and the ones that need to be said yes to and developed and cultivated and the ones that need to be tapped into the root cause. But in particular for people that are newer in the spiritual journey or not even on the spiritual journey yet, and again, this is what Alpha does well in those first couple of weeks, you want to tap into the latent desire that people have. So, just yesterday, Jackie Hill Perry at the conference, the Art of Teaching conference, was doing this riff on original sin. And she said the result of original sin, and I was expecting her to say is human brokenness or human wound, some Christian cliche. And she just used one word she said was thirst. Adam and Eve now thirst. Human beings thirst for something that nothing other than God can satisfy. And of course, this easily goes into kind of, benign Christian preaching on the God-shaped hole. But there is something there that we want to tap into.
Yeah.
I think that is hugely helpful because we're not going to re-enchant the world purely through analyzing and dissecting secularism.
Yes.
Intellectual,
Yes.
riposte.
That's exactly right. A chart is not, and I love a chart, is not going to bring somebody
The
back.
Overton window is not going to
Well,
bring
I'm
you
actually
back.
about to talk about the Overton window right now. So I think the Overton window
but not good.
But it might help those listening to this podcast.
may bring people back. We talk
A chart plus a defibrillator.
in our
Like kind of
forming
both.
men stuff, because you're often dealing with men with disordered desires in a lot of our work. We say there's 3 approaches to desire. You can release your desire. That's just secularism, go after.
Yep.
Yeah.
Religion is to repress your desire.
Yeah, just stuff it down
And Jesus wants us to redirect our desire. And I think that's what we're actually saying right here. You need to probe the flattening out of the universe. People struggle for significance. I remember talking with a guy in Wall Street who had been working and working and working. And a lot of folks, depending on sort of which part of financial services you work in, a lot of folks live for the bonus. And this guy had this dream bonus, and it had one more zero than he'd hoped. And when he got this bonus, he sort of said, I never forget this, he said, I just thought it would feel better than this.
And one more zero
what
is
a
a lot.
summary of life in the modern
No,
world.
I just thought it would feel better than
this.
this. So we have no sacred moments anymore. There's no shared moments of transcendence. They're all flattened out. And everything is just, there's a struggle for significance. I just thought it would feel better than this. So awakening desire is huge. The next stage.
Yeah, what's the next step?
Stage 2 is renewal, which is returning to reality. We have to return to reality. The truth is, the secular frame, the malaise of innocence, is actually a lie.
Yes.
And you can tell
Which is so weird because it claims to be the cold, hard truth.
yes, and you can live with a lie for a long time, but it will create tremendous damage and eventually. I don't know if you've ever thought about writing about lies and living lies and that sort of thing. Maybe that's a book idea for you. But ultimately what we want to do is we want to return to reality. Yeah. And there's 2 components that I think that are important. Number 1, things have to become plausible. That's step 1. They've got to become plausible. Most people, I remember for myself just thinking, there's no way I could ever be a Christian. Like
It wasn't plausible. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's Peter Berger that talked about plausibility structures, which is like
believable ideas.
Yeah, you've got to create something. People go, I could do that. I could do that. And so we can't produce a kind of faith that makes people go, I could never do that. We've got to show that faith it is what I remember Kelly used to say this all the time in New York. It is intellectually credible, but existentially satisfying. And so it's a multi-dimensional approach of building bridges that show people. I think a huge part of this is community. We've got to show communities of love, communities of delight, communities of discipline, communities of self-control, that people think, wow, you're showing me this is actually plausible. This is my youth group experience. When I met these kids who were more passionate for God than I was for
passionate
sin,
about anything else.
I was like, wow, there's a thing you can do with your passion. I never thought they could find an expression through faith. So I think a lot of this is working hard. A lot of times people say as well, we don't need apologetics anymore. That, I don't know who said that when that came up. The number 1 questions when you talk with Gen Z, they have the basic questions.
Certainly.
How do I trust the Bible? How could Jesus be the only way? How could there be a problem with evil? So I think we need to put apologetics in. When Keller used to teach preaching training, he talked about what he called defeater beliefs. And in every talk, he had a series of 7 or 8 defeater beliefs he was always trying to defeat. And he called a defeater belief something non-Christians believe that was obviously true so that Christianity could not be true.
Interesting.
They were rarely conscious.
Just like dead on arrival kind of like, hey, until this is overcome, it doesn't make, there's no possibility of structure.
In a harsh example, sexuality in the modern age. We know that all sexual expressions and identities are valid, healthy, and good.
And that to suppress them will make you unhappy and miserable and damage your life.
If whatever you're going to say about Jesus...
So that's the defeater belief.
Yeah, whatever you say about Jesus, if it doesn't assume that, Christianity is not true. And he had 7 or 8 of these things, and in every talk he would sort of address these defeated beliefs. I think we have to work hard to show that Christianity is plausible. That's going to require us to borrow from church history, to show other people in other seasons who wrestled with profound things. It's going to have a community element. It's going to have a thoughtfulness and an approach.
It's going to have a poking holes in the secular narrative.
Yep.
You've heard it said, but I say to you, kind of biopsy of...
It's going to take a ton of that. But then the other thing it has to be is it has to be desirable.
Yeah, people have to want to believe it's true.
You've got to tell in the rawest form that has been genuinely butchered and done so poorly at such scale. You've got to make Jesus and the kingdom of God a more compelling story. And you can't, saying it's a more, this is where people go wrong, I think. They say it's a more compelling story without showing you it's a more compelling story.
Yes.
They say Jesus is more compelling than,
so it's an ought to, it's a religious
that's
duty.
Exactly right. It's
not
a thin alternative rather than a richly textured, beautiful dynamic. So the return of reality requires plausibility, but it also requires desirability. Just one example of how this works. In reading about St. Augustine's conversion, Augustine was a young man seeking pleasure, seeking status. He's famous for saying, Lord, give me self-control. Just not yet. He talked about living in a cauldron of lust, was promiscuous, had a child sort of with a mistress. And his mother was trying to get him converted and just praying for him and deeply concerned about him. One of the key turning points of his conversion was reading the biography of the Desert Fathers. St. Anthony reads about it, and it says, it shook them reading about this holy man and his channeling of passion that one of his friends put the book down and said, we must go to the desert too. We must live this life. And Augustine, reeling from the power not just of a plausible life, which is what he was showing him, it's possible to resist these temptations, but the power of a consecrated life.
The desirability of it.
That's right. Made him leave the room, walk out, and that's when he hears, take up and read, take up and read,
his conversion moment. Yeah.
His heart was open to wanting more than the sort of thin hedonism that he'd been living in, and ultimately it leads him out. So how do we make something desirable? Philosophers have historically talked about the good, the true, the beautiful. The challenge is no one can agree what is good, believe anything is absolutely true, and then beauty gets put away to the subjective. I think we need to reverse that order. I think we need to start with the beautiful. We need to put the beauty of Jesus on display. The way that Jesus looked at the other. The way that Jesus showed mercy, the concept of mercy, the way Jesus showed compassion to those who were wrestling with shame, the way that Jesus hated the self-righteous systems that oppressed people. We need to teach into that. Our message cannot be generic faith. It must be the beauty of Jesus on display. To give you a practical way of preaching this, I always have been focusing as of late on the sinful woman is what she's called. Jesus is having lunch with a Pharisee, and it says a sinful woman comes in, and she washes Jesus' feet with her hair and her tears. And the Pharisee says, this man cannot be a prophet, otherwise he would know who's touching her. Now Jesus launches into a story about being forgiven much and loving much. But I thought about life from that woman's position. In her religious society, there's no room for her. Outside of religion, she's being commodified and used. And when she looks at the plausibility structures of her world, something bursts on the scene with such hope. A man named Jesus. Do you know how much longing you must have to deal with the shame of going into a Pharisee's house, that judgment, that attack, condemnation.
Shame and an honor-shame culture.
To go to the feet of Jesus in tears and to have his announcement over you. The person of Jesus shone with such hope and possibility in the midst of her cultural options. She was compelled towards him. We've got to preach Jesus and his heart and his mercy and his kingdom and his life and love in such a way that non-believers are like, I don't care what anyone says. My desire for what he has and what he offers is the driving force of my life. So it's got to be both plausible and beautiful. This is a recovery of the Christian arts and everything like that. But number 3, re-enchanting the world. Re-enchanting the world. We do this by enjoying God as Christians. Do you want to talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, I think you were getting into that at the end with the beautiful. That step 3 on the ladder is re-enchanting the world. It's, I think, 2 ways that we can do that in our preaching and teaching are, 1, to just live a richly joyful life in God.
Yeah.
Like, I know my role in this season podcast, I'm just going for Best Supporting Actor, right? So let me make my minor contribution here. If you can find radical delight in God every day, you as a person, you listening, whatever, teaching pastor, First Baptist, whatever, whoever you are, youth pastor, wherever you're at, if you every day set aside your sermon, set aside pastoral calls, set aside secularism and Charles Taylor and all the steps and all the frames, if you can find rich daily joy in God, Willard had that beautiful line, we must arrange our days so that we are experiencing deep joy, confidence, and hope in our everyday lives with God.
Yeah.
If you can arrange your days so you are just drinking deeply from the well of God's joy, and you can live that way, that will leak through your life. It will leak through when you're having coffee with somebody. It'll leak through you when you're chatting to a neighbor. It'll leak through you when you're preaching, and it should. And it won't be a false, pseudo fake sales pitch. It'll just be you sharing your inner life with the world. And that's what much of preaching is. And the other thing I think we can really do on the beautiful side is we can live deeply relational lives together. You mentioned this in passing, how community, I think, is going to become new begin in Gospel in a Pluralistic Society, which is another fantastic read in this vein, called Community, a Gospel Hermeneutic, meaning he said, if you actually live the life and teachings of Jesus together in community, in the family of God, as brothers and sisters, that communal life will become an apologetic, a cultural apologetic, a case for the plausibility and desirability of the kingdom. Because while people may not desire yet the Christian sex ethic or view of marriage or view of authority or biblical truth, I can tell you, I don't know a single neighbor or non-Christian friend that does not desire the community that we have, that does not watch us on our deck. It's interesting, we just moved to LA and we have this beautiful front deck, but it's where we do Sabbath dinner, fire pit, community, but it's pretty public. Like people walking their dogs and stuff can see us. We're like out in the front of the house. It's where the eating area is. And I just sometimes wonder, like we're out there just laughing. Sabbath night, we were there, and there's maybe, 13 of us, and we're doing highlight of the week and gratitude to God, and we're laughing, and there's prayer, and there's blessing. And I'm just thinking, man, I wonder, we weren't doing it to perform. We were just doing it as our Sabbath feast. It just happened to be in public, not in public, but
on the front deck.
Yes, I'm sure people were walking their dogs and thinking, what is that, And so I think there is something beyond compelling for all of its flaws about broken Christian people doing life together in a meaningful, loving way that can become deeply beautiful as we attempt to re-enchant the world.
Amen. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.